Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about fat. So we're in chapter 4. Today some of our learning objectives include identifying foods high and low in fat and how fat enhances the eating experience, identify food sources of saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and trans fatty acids, identify sources and functions of the following essential fatty acids, DHA and EPA, and cholesterol, explain how fat is digested, absorbed, and supplied to the cells in the body and its functions, discuss the dietary recommendations for fat and cholesterol, and prepare and present creative and healthy menu dishes using dairy and eggs. So there's a lot in these learning objectives, and I'm going to do my best to hit all of them. Just to keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of information that's thrown at you, and I'll do my best to really highlight and identify those the key information that you'll need to do well on this test. Okay, so we're talking about fat today. So there is healthy fat and there are healthy fats and there are unhealthy fats. So we're going to be talking about both in this lecture. But it's really important that we're talking about unhealthy fats because a diet low in unhealthy fats is a preventative factor for heart disease. So I know that was really wordy, but if we eat a diet that's rich in healthy fats, then that's a risk. That's a protective factor, and our chances of developing heart disease are lower. So I'll try and reiterate that throughout the lecture and articulate it better. I know it's kind of jumbled up, but as I go through, I'll try to make that more clear and clear. So why talk about heart disease? Well, it's the number one killer for U.S. men and women. We're going to learn LDL cholesterol. Another term is unhealthy cholesterol, or if it's easier to remember, bad cholesterol. I don't like using the terms good and bad, but to make things simpler, I will. But LDL cholesterol contributes to clogging your arteries and making them less flexible. So if any of you have ever gone to the doctor and had blood work done, LDL cholesterol is one of the blood tests that you can have done. And elevated LDL cholesterol is not a good sign, and it is a risk factor for developing heart disease. And there it is. A high LDL is a risk factor for heart attacks and stroke. So we'll talk about foods that contribute to elevated LDL cholesterol, and so hopefully you can apply that in your life and share that with your friends and family. So when we say heart attack, we mean when the flow of blood to a section of the heart muscle is suddenly blocked, and a stroke occurs when blood supply to part of the brain is cut off. So if you see this image, this is an example of a clogged artery. So a buildup of fat deposits, which we call plaque, but in the arteries. When that happens, the artery wall becomes really thick and it constricts blood flow. And so that constricting of blood flow, if fat deposits are building up in our arteries, which our arteries we have all throughout the body, but those main arteries that lead to the heart, it's really important. If those become blocked, we're at risk for developing or to having a heart attack or having a stroke. So we definitely want to be aware of what foods can prevent that and what foods contribute to that, and so we can slow down or moderate how much of the foods that with the high cholesterol, or not high cholesterol, but high saturated fat and trans fat leads to the clogging of the arteries. This slide actually says what I just said. The primary way in which LDL cholesterol levels become too high is through eating too much saturated and trans fat. There are additional risk factors for developing heart disease, and those are lack of exercise, obesity, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and smoking. So this is just going over the distribution range. If you were to, I know we're utilizing MyFitnessPal, and so if you're looking at overall calories, if you wanted to break down, this is just a suggestion, the percentage. So let's say you're at a 2,000 calorie diet. That just makes that really easy. That number is really even. So a 2,000 calorie diet, and let's say 20% of your calories, 20% of those calories come from fat. So that would mean okay, hold on. So that would mean 20% of the calories that come from fat. That's what's factored into. You can play around with those ranges. Um, so it's really up to you, but the recommendation is between 20 and 35% of your calories can come from fat. So that's one thing that we talk about, but then how about distributing that evenly so that way you're making sure that you're getting the majority of those calories from fat from healthy fat, because you want a higher ratio of healthy fat to unhealthy fat to prevent heart disease. So the amount of fat you eat has no relationship to your risk for heart disease, but the type of fat eaten is extremely important. By choosing mono and polyunsaturated fats instead of saturated fat and completely avoiding trans fat, one lowers their risk of heart disease. So I'm going to continue to come back to this because, as I've said, in my profession as a dietitian, my number one goal for any of my clients and for my students when I'm disseminating information is to let them know what foods they can eat to improve their health and which foods that we eat that can contribute to potentially be a risk factor for developing diseases, because at the end of the day, a quality of life for me is my number one priority for as a dietitian for my clients and students. So one thing I want you to remember for the test is that oils, as it says here, are typically liquid at room temperature and most often come from plants. So I want you to be sure to remember that. Yes, so oil is typically liquid at room temperature and typically comes from plant sources. So I definitely want you to remember that for the test. And then fats generally are solid at room temperature. An example of that would be butter. Okay, so I hope that most of the people I'm talking to are foodies in here. And so many of you probably already know this, but let's go ahead and review and introduce for anyone who doesn't know yet. Fat, when it's incorporated into our food, enhances taste and aroma, adds crispiness to fried foods, makes meats juicier and tender, makes baked goods tender, carries flavors such as in Indian curry, and provides a smooth texture and creamy mouthfeel. So fat is great, right? A lot of us love using fat while we're cooking and while we're baking, but it's really important that we're getting a good amount of healthy fat along with some saturated fat. But we want more healthy fat because this lowers our risk for developing heart disease. So I continue to say that only because I'm not a stickler when it comes to I like to have a little butter from time to time, especially when I'm cooking and baking, but I want to make sure that I'm getting enough healthy fats like from avocados and fatty fish to make sure that I'm not overindulging in the saturated fat and putting myself at risk for clogging my arteries. So I'm going to continue to come back to that just so that way you can hopefully remember that. And that's a big distinction that I want you all to make is moderation is really important. Okay, foods with little or no fat, fruits, vegetables, beans, and peas, non-fat dairy products, bread, cereals, and grains. So we're not going to be talking about a lot of those foods in this lecture. Okay, so you probably already know what's low to no fat because I just went over that. But let's talk about the higher in fat group. Fats, oils, such as those found in condiments, meat, poultry, fish, chicken without skin, and many fish are quite low in fat. So that would be, I'm sorry, I added that note just to say meat, poultry, and fish can be higher in fat. But if you're eating chicken without the skin, or depending on the type of fish you choose, they will be low in fat. There's always the exception, right? Or the caveat. Regular dairy foods such as cheese are high in fat, and then nuts and seeds. But as we'll talk about it, most nuts and seeds are high in healthy fat compared to unhealthy fat. So I really like this chart. This is directly from our book. I took a screenshot of it. So foods that I don't know if you want to think about low fat, medium fat, and high fat as maybe like low fat is green, medium fat yellow, and then high fat red. So low fat green meaning like it's fine to have this probably every single day because they're lower in fat. Medium fat yellow, so like maybe don't have that every day of the week, maybe 3 to 4 times a week. And then those foods that fall into the high fat category, maybe if we thought about it as like the color red, it's like a traffic light, maybe thinking about only having those 1 to 2 times per week. So it's completely up to you. Now let's say that you have a diet that's very low in fat intake anyway, and you have whole milk or yogurt made from whole milk. It's not so much about overindulging one day, although hopefully we don't, because that'll probably be a lot of stress on your tummy, but or your digestive system. But just thinking about having high fat items all throughout the day, every single day, over time that is introducing saturated fat into the body, and it's more likely that will clog our arteries. So thinking about, I just used a traffic light as a metaphor. If you want to try to think about, well, how often can I have that, or what does moderation mean? Moderation can mean different things to different people, but that's one suggestion. And maybe it's a trade-off. Maybe you have low-fat milk, I don't know, or low-fat yogurt, so that later on in the week or or at the end of the day, maybe you can have ice cream, which is typically really high in fat and added sugars. So it's totally up to you how you want to moderate. I think it's great that everyone is utilizing MyFitnessPal. I hope that you continue to use it outside of this class as a reference. It's a really great indicator. I use it too. It's a really great indicator of just like what's really in our foods and how I think it's fun. I think it's really fun to look at all the nutrients, or then I should say like the nutrient facts, because then I'm finding out, okay, how much of my calories are coming from fat, carbohydrates, and protein, and what kinds of carbohydrates, protein, and fat am I eating? Because if I don't document that, I don't really know. I don't pay attention to what I eat well enough without documenting. If I'm documenting and entering it, I can start to see trends and patterns, and that for me makes it easier to make some changes. Like when I first started using MyFitnessPal, I thought that I ate a relatively healthy diet, but it turns out my diet at the time was high in sugar and salt, but I never would have known that because I wasn't tracking my food intake. So these are just suggestions. Take it at face value, take it for what it is. I am not saying you need to change how you eat at all. I'm just, if you are interested in making your diet a little bit healthier, those would be my suggestions. And that's part of the class. I'm teaching you the dietary guidelines. So this is another table that's in your book. And I really like it because for any of you out there who's wondering, what does lean protein even mean? It gives you a nice solid list. So poultry, all skinless, chicken, turkey, duck. There's always that exception, with the exception of chicken wings with skin. Ground turkey or ground chicken or turkey with skin, that means that it's if it has skin, then it's going to be higher in fat. And then fried chicken, we can't I know I like fried chicken as much as the next person, but it is going to be, once the chicken on its own without skin, lean, it's a lean protein because it has a low amount of fat in it. But as soon as we leave the skin on and or we fry that chicken, we've battered it, right? So the batter is flour and egg, and then you're deep frying it, so that's where the fat gets introduced. So always a catch, right? All fish and shellfish, beef, pork, veal, egg. So some things to look out for when you're maybe you want to make some food swaps. So maybe you really like beef, but you're thinking, well, how do I make that happen? Well, if you can get ground beef 10% or lower fat, then that's an example of lean protein. So you can still have your burgers, you can still have your meatballs, you can still have your ground beef or ground steak, I should say, for tacos or other meals. You just want to go for these specific like cuts, like round flank steak, top sirloin, or tenderloin. And now, of course, we have to think about budget, right? So all of these things factor, and we talked about that, I think, in the very first lecture, of all the factors that go into what foods we purchase and eat. So just being on the lookout. High fat proteins I would try to avoid if you can, or really reduce your intake. And when I say reduce, maybe 1 to max 2 times per week. I myself love hot dogs, bacon, sausage. I love those foods. But when I had my blood work done not too long ago, I realized that my LDL cholesterol, or no, sorry, my triglycerides were high, and so I realized like I had to make some changes. As much as I love hot dogs, bacon, and sausage, I was having those probably, I would say probably 3 to 4 times a week, because when I was cooking breakfast, but that's my favorite, is to make like little breakfast melts, or like bacon or sausage with my eggs. And so I had to really eat. I didn't think 3 to 4 times was much, but according to my blood results, it was. So that's me. Maybe your body processes food differently. And I always recommend in my classes that if you haven't gone to your primary doctor and done a checkup lately, please don't be afraid. Please go and see what your numbers are, because if we don't really know, then we can't make the necessary changes to be healthier. It can be scary going to the doctor, but I highly recommend it. Going to your primary care physician at least once a year, and just seeing where your numbers are at. Get your physical done. Check your blood pressure. Have blood work done, so that way the doctor can review with you how you're doing. I think it's a really great check-in and a really great opportunity for us to intervene, and if we want to, but I would recommend it. It's better to find out sooner and prevent than later, and then things are damaged and you can't go back, you can't change them. Sometimes that happens. So fats can also be referred to as fatty acids. Triglycerides, we were just talking about that. So most of the lipids in the human body are in the form of triglycerides. So this is a picture of a triglyceride. So you've got your glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids attached. Don't worry, you don't need to know that for the test. So the types of triglycerides that I've been talking about, the short terms are saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. The scientific terms would be fatty acid. So feel free to go through and read these definitions. One thing that I think is the most important with the poly and monounsaturated fat, and I'm going to show you in the next slide a picture, is the difference in their chemical structure. You don't need to know this for the test, but it's just really interesting. So let's start with saturated fatty acid, and I'll just move to poly and then, or mono, and then poly will just it'll make sense. So saturated fatty acid, a triglyceride in which the maximum number of hydrogens are attached to every carbon atom, thus the fat is saturated with hydrogen atoms. So cool, that's where we get that word from. And then monounsaturated fatty acid is a triglyceride in which most of the fatty acids are monounsaturated. One fatty acid is missing a pair of hydrogen atoms in the middle. So this is really important, because so here on the left is an example of saturated fatty acid, and you can see this chain is just single bonds all the way through. Now the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated have a double carbon bond in the middle. So what that is very important, because that's an opportunity for your body to break that bond apart. So it's just really cool. With saturated fat, you can see the lines, how they can be stacked up really easily. So like, let's imagine on the left, this fatty acid, let's imagine this being how it is, and it's harder for the body to break down, and it just stacks up. You can think of plaque building up in the body. Versus on the right, the unsaturated fatty acid, if your body can break up that bond, and you can see that you can see like the example, the little legs are like sticking out, they're not going to stack. They're not going to stack well. They're like Legos. If you think about Legos, they're straight and they stack on top of each other. These are all crooked and messed up, which is actually a good thing, because then your body can break that bond, get some energy from it, and it's not going to stack up and build up in your arteries. So that's how I decipher the two. Just food for thought. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about the science part in the on the test. Don't worry about that. So I just want you to be aware, foods high in saturated fat. We've talked about beef and pork, but also pastries are typically high in fat. If anybody's taken the baking class, then you know. Whole milk and dairy products. So one thing I want you to keep in mind for the test is that cream cheese or like ice cream or butter, those are examples of dairy products that are very high in fat, and they do not count in the dairy group of my plate. So for the test, I want you to remember that cream cheese is not part of the dairy group on my plate. Yes, it's made from milk, but it's not considered a good source of calcium, and for that reason it doesn't make it into the dairy group on my plate. Cool. Oh, I love that I included Coffee Mate. My dad loves Coffee Mate creamer. I've been trying to get him to switch. If you look on the ingredient list, Coffee Mate is like not even made from milk. I mean, there are some milk derivatives, but the rest is just a bunch of, I don't even know how it's been made, okay? Like, next time you have a moment, look at the ingredient list of Coffee Mate if you or your family members use it, because it's pretty interesting that it's really hard to find milk in the list, which makes sense why it can be left out unrefrigerated. But it has trans fat in it, which is also contributes to the long shelf life, but I do not recommend it. I would recommend switching to another creamer. Look for one that is actually like where dairy or milk comes at the beginning of the ingredient list or shows up at some point, because if you look on Coffee Mate, it doesn't show up. It may show a milk derivative of some sort, but that's it. That's not really milk. So anyways, I always like to share that because most people don't know that, especially because it's so branded well and it tastes so great in coffee that most of us have no idea. Okay, so French fries, eggs, poultry with skin. Okay, yes. Okay. Next. So these are some foods that are high in monounsaturated fat. So you can see these plant oils, avocado, olives, but with olives, be careful. They typically tend to be high in sodium, so just double check the olives that you're getting are not high in sodium. If they are, then limit how many you have in one sitting. If you're concerned about sodium intake, which most of us should be, because a diet high in sodium also is a risk factor for heart disease. All right, these are examples of foods high in polyunsaturated fat. I don't recommend corn oil or soybean oil. Sunflower oil is fine, but as some of you who have ever cooked with it know, it has a low smoke point. So I recommend sunflower oil for salads. Nuts and seeds and fatty fish are a go-to. I'm surprised I didn't put avocado on this list because it should definitely be on this list. So wait, just to reiterate, polyunsaturated fat is healthy, and monounsaturated fat is healthy. So these are, anything from these lists are pretty much, not that list, are pretty much fair game. The only ones that I would be hesitant on are corn oil or soybean oil. I mean, I personally use a blend. I use the blend that's from Costco, or I use olive oil. Those are the only two that I use. Corn oil and soybean oil are found in a lot of other products, so I don't tend to go for those. But that's just me personally, and I eat tofu. I eat other soy products, so again, moderation. So maybe you're not in that boat, but I already have a diet that's high in corn and soybeans, so I don't use those oils. So trans fat, this is a great book. It's a thick book too. I have not read the whole thing, but it has really great information in it. And I just recommend if you're interested. It has nothing to do with trans fat. If anything, it has all to do with eating a diet that's healthy and prevents you from developing disease. Discover the foods scientifically proven to prevent and reverse disease. Well, reverse, I don't know about all that, but I have not tried all the things that are in that book yet, so who knows. But trans fat occurs naturally at low levels in meat and dairy, so another good reason to moderate how much dairy and meat intake we have in our diet. Trans fat are created when vegetable oils undergo partial hydrogenation. So this trans fat hydrogenation, these are things that I want you to remember for the test. So trans fat are unhealthy fats, or if you want to think of them as contributing to bad cholesterol. Actually, these fats your body can't really break down. That's why we recommend eliminating trans fat from the diet completely, because your body cannot break them down. The trans fat was chemically man-made because food manufacturers want to extend shelf life, so this was their way of going about it. They are supposed to be banned, but not a surprise to me. There will be something new on the market. When trans fat is off the market, something new will come in. It will also be man-made and chemical, and it'll take years for us to ban it from being in food products. It was very popular in the 80s, and then as of recently, in the last 10 years, it's been banned. So food manufacturers are not supposed to be using it in their foods anymore, but they get away with it. They'll rename it something else, and we'll have to worry about banning that. I digress. Sorry. So when I was saying about Coffee Mate, trans fat is in that. So what I want you to remember for the test is that I'm just making sure that I get it right, because I'm trying to help you all out. Okay, so what I wanted you to remember is that anything that's hydrogenated oil, partially hydrogenated oil, that's an example of a fat that has trans fat. So just remember hydrogenation. Hydrogenated oils have trans fat, or are an example of trans fat. This is the process of how you go from vegetable oils, for example, to shortening margarine. So they undergo a process called hydrogenation, and but again, this produces trans fat. Here are examples of foods that contain trans fat. I wasn't surprised, maybe you are, but these are all processed foods. So I remember I said a couple lectures ago that the more that we are able to cook from home, the healthier that our diet can be. These foods are very processed. So frozen foods, ready-made foods, those are typically going to have trans fat in them because they were designed to have a long shelf life. And that's why trans fat is in them. Okay, so I'm gonna get really wordy, and I'm gonna try and not allow you to get lost in the words. The body can make all of the fatty acids it needs except for two. These two acids are referred to essential fatty acids because it is essential that we get them from our diet because our body can't make them. So that would be an example is linoleic acid, omega-6, and alpha linoleic acid, which is omega-3. Here's a nice list of foods with omega-3 and omega-6. So if you can get a diet that's higher in omega-3s and omega-6, this is heart protective. These are healthy fats, so we definitely want that. Eating a diet that's high in omega-3 and omega-6 will increase your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. So I want you to remember that for the test. These are just some functions of linoleic acid and alpha linoleic acid. They help the health of all of your body's cells, yes, because your cells do have fatty acids all in and around them. Helps the immune system do its job, and they are vital for normal growth and development in infants and children. Okay, DHA and EPA. These are found in omega-3 fatty acids. So here's a great list of fatty fish, and those fatty fish are high in EPA and DHA. So salmon, halibut, mackerel, tuna, trout. With tuna, you do want to be careful. Tuna tends to be one of those fish that's high in mercury, so you don't want to overindulge in tuna either. So definitely alternate and just be aware of that. But then cod, haddock, flounder also have DHA and EPA. And you already know this because it was in the previous slides, but ALA, alpha linoleic acid, or omega-3s are found in flax seeds, flaxseed oil, walnut oil, canola oil, and walnuts. Here are some great functions of DHA and EPA. They reduce blood pressure, reduce heart rate, reduce blood triglyceride levels, and reduce blood clots, which can lead to heart attacks. So if you can get lots of omega-3 and omega-6, that would be for the best. Look, it's our human body systems again. That's just it saying, I just included it because I always like to think about the body in this way. Our body is very complex, and all of the nutrients that we give our body will help all of our organs and all of these body systems. This is just a recommendation in case you were curious. If you eat about 8 ounces per week of a variety of seafood, that will tend to provide 250 milligrams of EPA and DHA, which is part of the dietary guidelines. So that way you know that you're getting enough omega-3, and eating a variety means that it's less likely that you'll overindulge on tuna and have a diet high in mercury. Here's a note on mercury. Nearly all fish and shellfish contain traces of mercury. This is a concern for pregnant women who may become pregnant, nursing mothers, and young children may need to avoid certain fish. And which fish? I provide that on this slide. So this recommendation would mean do not eat king mackerel, marlin, orange ruffly, shark, swordfish, tilefish, ahi tuna, and big eye tuna, because they all contain high levels of mercury. You can choose a variety of fish and shellfish that are lower in mercury, such as shrimp, canned light tuna, salmon, pollock, and catfish. So a note on shrimp, a note on cholesterol. Our cholesterol levels are not indicative of eating foods that are high in cholesterol. What I mean is, the way that we lower our cholesterol levels is by having a diet that's low in saturated fat and exercising, and making sure we have a diet that's high in omega-3 and omega-6. That will really, really help us, our cholesterol levels. It's not necessarily about eating foods that are high in cholesterol themselves. It's more so about the types of fat that you're eating. I know that might be really hard for some of us. Even recently, my husband, his cholesterol was a little elevated, and the doctor said, don't eat shrimp and eggs. And I said, I'm going to overrule that. I'm going to use my dietitian card. It is not 100% accurate. So I told him the same thing I'm telling you, which is increase exercise. If anybody out there has high cholesterol, has family members that have high cholesterol, increase exercise, eat foods that are high in omega-3 and omega-6. If that is not possible, one thing that you may want to do if you have high cholesterol or even high triglycerides, you can take an omega-3 supplement, which will typically be a fish oil, but I recommend a vegan supplement instead, because it'll have flaxseed, walnuts, it'll have those nuts and seeds as part of the supplement. And the reason why is because, I don't know about you all, but if you've ever taken fish oil supplement, you sometimes burp, and that's just gross, and yeah, no. So, just food for thought. Okie dokie. Yeah, limit white albacore tuna to 6 ounces per week, and check local advisories about the safety of locally caught fish. If no advice is available, eat up to 6 ounces of fish from local waters, 1 to 3 ounces per week for young children, but don't eat any other fish that week. It's a lot to remember, so keep it simple as best you can. Cholesterol. So cholesterol is not a bad thing. We do need cholesterol. Cholesterol is found only in animal foods. Oh, sorry. When I say we need cholesterol, I mean our bodies can make cholesterol, and it's part of our cells. Cholesterol is needed to maintain cell membrane and is in every cell in your body. But we just want to be careful about how much food that we're intaking. Saturated fat that we're intaking. So cholesterol is needed to make bile acids, many hormones such as estrogen and cortisone, and believe it or not, vitamin D. Cholesterol is only found in animal products. So this is why I know a lot of doctors have said to avoid cholesterol. But if you look at any of these, if they're high in saturated fat, then yeah, we should be limiting them, maybe even avoiding them. However, the body does make some cholesterol daily. Most people do not need to restrict the cholesterol they eat because the cholesterol they eat does not appreciably affect their blood cholesterol levels. That is straight from our textbook, which was written by a dietitian and a chef. So there you go, folks. But do lower, if you have a diet that's high in saturated fat, yeah, please do lower intake of foods that are high in saturated fat because those are contributing factors to heart disease, and I'm all about protecting you all from that. So in case anybody is wondering, why do we even need fat in the body? 13 to 30% of your weight is fat. Fat is part of all the cells in your body. Fat provides energy, 9 calories per gram. Fat is found under the skin and provides insulation, helps us maintain our body temperature, and cushion, keeps critical organs safe. We don't want to have excess, but a little bit of, or not a little, but 13 to, I believe the recommendation, I think is no more than 25%. Maybe it is 30%. I know here it says 13 to 30%, but healthy range, I think. I haven't read up on it lately, but I think we should aim to be 25% or lower. So, yes. Okay. So, fat transports fat-soluble vitamins, so we need fat to help us digest certain vitamins A, D, E, and K. Certain fat-containing foods provide the body with essential fatty acids, and they're needed for normal growth and development, the immune system, and healthy cells. So digestion, absorption, and metabolism. Fats are hard for the body to digest and absorb because triglycerides and water don't mix. We've probably seen that, especially like if we've made vinaigrette. That's an example of what happens as well in the body. Minimal digestion of fat occurs before they reach the small intestine. When fats reach the small intestine, the gallbladder releases bile into the intestine. So what I need you to remember for the test is bile. I want you to remember for the test, when fats reach the small intestine, the gallbladder releases bile into the intestine. That is very important. Your gallbladder is a small organ, and it hangs out underneath the liver, and it releases bile. Bile emulsifies fat and breaks it down, so that way enzymes can break it down. Enzymes can break it down even further, and then they're more readily and easily absorbed. The fatty acids are absorbed into the small intestine where triglycerides are reformed. Very fascinating how the body works. So again, just for the test, I want you to remember that the gallbladder releases bile to break down or emulsify fat. I also want you to remember that fat contains 9 calories per gram. Did I say that on this last slide? If not, that was a reminder because you'll need to know that for the test. Yep, fat provides 9 calories per gram. So it provides quite a bit of energy. Okay, so we've also got these things floating around in our bodies called lipoproteins. I bet you were wondering what the LDL stood for. Probably not. So we're coming up on a close, and thank you so much for sticking with me throughout this lecture and every lecture. I hope that you're learning a lot. Please, if there's anything that I go too quickly on, please feel free to email me and ask for clarification. Please, if you ever have questions in general about nutrition or diet or living a healthy life, never hesitate to reach out. I'm always a resource and always happy to help. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish it off. Lipoproteins contain varying amounts of fats and protein and cholesterol. Lipoproteins carry triglycerides around the body because their protein and phospholipids make them water soluble. A lipoprotein called a chylomicron carries mostly triglycerides and some cholesterol from the intestine to the body's cell. So they have a very important role. So here's where LDL and HDL come into play. So LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. These carry cholesterol to the body cells. They are sometimes referred to as bad cholesterol. I don't like the terms good and bad, but to make things simpler, we will say this. I prefer healthy and unhealthy. Because the higher the level in your blood, the greater your risk for heart disease. I've been saying that. So we started the PowerPoint with that, and we're ending the PowerPoint with that. And then high density lipoproteins. So these are the good cholesterol. We want higher level of HDL and a lower level of LDL. So it picks up cholesterol from the cells and takes it to the liver for removal. Lastly, milk is an excellent source of high quality protein, carbohydrates, riboflavin, vitamins A and D if fortified, calcium, and other minerals. We do recommend low fat or non fat milk and milk products to reduce our saturated fat intake. So, just a question that I wanted to end with for us to start thinking about application is how would you incorporate low fat cheeses, yogurt, and eggs into your dishes to add flavor, texture, or make a dish healthier? Thanks again for joining me. You guys are awesome. Please, like I said, reach out if you ever need to. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you in the next lecture.